Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Erica Dale. I'm a Senior Account Manager here at NewComp, and I'm here with Tim Kratowski. I got your last name right this time, but not your first name. It's Tom. Oh my gosh. So we're here today to talk about how we're going to make your next viz super fantastic. And Tom is absolutely the right guy to do this. I was really excited to do this project with him. I've been working with Tom a lot on a couple of different projects, and he's definitely the guy to be learning from. So just as a few people are joining us, people are still struggling in, so a couple of logistics. We are recording this session, so if you don't want to be recorded, all lines will be muted, but if you don't want to be recorded, just feel free to drop them. We can send you the recording later. For questions, there is a question dialog box in the GoToWebinar panel. Enter your questions there. I'll bring them up to Tom as I can throughout his presentation, or we'll answer in line, or we may take it offline if it's a complicated question. We may take it offline and follow up with you one-on-one, depending on how in-depth we need to go. And so, Tom, I'm going to also look to you if I ask you a question that I thought was going to be an easy one, but is not. So just say, you know what, we'll take that one offline, or, at a high level, here's how it is, but let's go deeper with that individual. So hopefully that sounds okay to you.
For sure.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tom. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. A couple of just brag slides as we kick this off. A little bit about NewComp Analytics. So our whole raison d'etre is analytics. We grew up in data and analytics. This is all we've ever done. And we really want to help you transform your organization from being a reactive reporting factory into a more self-guided, self-enabled, exploratory organization. We want you to help have that self-service culture. We want you to be able to really embed the culture of a Tableau-based organization into your champions and into your organization throughout. We have a number of certified staff on hand to help you do this. We have a lot of customers that can help attest to the qualifications of these staff members. And we also have a lot of complementary technologies and practices around serving up really good quality viz. So things that provide you with quality data, things that provide you with quality predictive outcomes, things that provide you with quality data foundation parts, so things like data warehousing, big data, that type of thing. So these are all things that help you really provide this as a service to your organization. So think of NewComp as a managed service for analytics, and we want to help you be that for your organization. So you can go to the next one if you want there, Tom.
Okay.
So our last brag slide for this is a hands-on workshop. So this is not necessarily intended for this audience. This audience really is probably pretty sophisticated, has been using Tableau for a little while, but you may have colleagues in your organization who haven't used Tableau a whole lot, and you want to get them a little bit deeper with it. So this is a hands-on test drive, but at your environment, in your home, wherever you're working from right now. Download the trial, we'll give you a link, and we take you in an instructor-led fashion through how to build a good viz using Tableau. So we'll have someone like Tom teaching, and then another teacher facilitating for asking questions. So in a much better way than what our students are going through with the online learning. So we do online learning for a business. We do this much better. So this is what we'll do. So we'll do the high-level concepts and to help people really understand what's going on with their data using Tableau. With that, I think, Tom, I hand this over to you, right?
Yeah, for sure. So thanks, Erica. Thanks for talking about some of the cool opportunities we have coming up with Tableau. So just for everyone, I think I'll introduce myself briefly. My name is Tom Krawitsky, and I'm the Advanced Analytics Lead here at NewComp Analytics. So I'm going to be walking through a number of tips and tricks that both myself and then our broader team at NewComp have recommended over the years, as well as show off some new features that are present in some of the more recent versions of Tableau. And the goal is really just to show off, some of those tricks or tips that you may not have found, and especially if you're, a novice these should help you out and help you think of kind of the next ways to make your visuals a little bit better. I certainly know when I was first starting out, you kind of get into this pattern of building visuals based on what you know, but definitely for me, I found it easier to see how other people built some visuals and what sources were they using for information and things like that. So the way that this is going to work today is I'm going to be kind of creating a dashboard and working through building a dashboard with all of you, and we'll kind of bring up the tips and tricks organically. So to kind of introduce our theme, I guess I'll just talk about where we're going to start today. And as you probably all know and have no shortage of hearing about, we're living through a very interesting time right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. So first and foremost, I want to say I hope you all are staying safe and haven't been impacted too much. I know for us, my girlfriend does actually work in healthcare, so I had to get tested and all these things. So it's definitely a stressful and interesting time. So I just hope that you all are doing okay. But for this webinar, one of the things we wanted to do is actually take a bit of a deeper dive on some of the COVID data that's available and use that sort of as our story to work through these tips and tricks. So we're going to actually build a dashboard that looks at a public data set in Canada, and based on that, we can do a sort of analysis. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the background research that I did when learning about this topic, and then in a couple minutes we'll dive right into Tableau. So when I was trying to think of what I wanted to present and what I wanted to talk about, of course, I learned a little bit about the 1918 pandemic, so almost 100 years ago. This was kind of commonly referred to as the Spanish flu, even though it's kind of disputed as to whether that started in Spain. But I found this subject very interesting, just comparing the differences that 100 years of societal and technological development have made when dealing with a pandemic. So let's go ahead and picture the world in 1918, right? The humanity is just starting to recover from a very destructive global war, and really the first world war, right? Before 1914, most wars were kind of little skirmishes. Some people would riding on cavalry on a horse and shoot back and forth and trade some land. But World War I was kind of the first example of a war where we had, mechanized supply lines and feeding the troops, and you could have, millions of soldiers on these battlefields going to war. And so, it was just, the world was absolutely reeling from this destructive conflict. And then in 1918, this mysterious influenza appears and starts infecting people. And, just imagine the difference where, all the things we're doing now, having daily news updates or using contact tracing apps or having people be able to go to the hospital and get tested, like all of these things were not really possible, right? And people were very much having to just kind of fend for it on their own. So even the concept of something like a stage reopening would be really hard. How would you coordinate such a task? In comparison today, it's actually quite different. So, in 2020, of course, we have, very competent medical staff who understand virology and epidemiological studies. We're able to model the spread of the outputs and coordinate globally. We're able to track if the disease is kind of abating over time and do genetic testing and things like that. One interesting fact that I found when kind of researching this subject was in the 1918 pandemic, the virus actually mutated to a more virulent and deadly strain in the later waves. And one of the reason that people suspect that this is because normally, if people get sick, they tend to stay home, they don't feel very well, they kind of isolate. And so the people who go out tend to have milder strains. And so that is the strain that becomes more, predominant in the society and tends to become the dominant strain. But in 1918, we're kind of in the last year of World War I. And if someone comes in with, bad symptoms, well, you tend to ship them around to a field hospital, right? And so basically you had the opposite effect. The more sick someone was, the more they got moved around, right? And so the strain actually got more intense over time. But we can actually track using genetic testing and other types of testing, what the strains are looking like. The reason I kind of bring all this up is just to talk kind of more about what we're interested in is the actual data behind COVID-19, right? We have these amazing new tools and technologies, including things like Tableau, that allow us to take a data set and visualize it and distribute it on a global scale, right? And the example I have here on the right of the Johns Hopkins Tableau dashboard was an early example. You may recall in early March, being able to log in and kind of track the spread of this virus within your country. And all of the data that's been available for everyone to look at, and whether you're in public health or not, I just think it's been very helpful in actually figuring out this pandemic. So on that theme, today we're going to take a public data set and then use it to make a simple dashboard from some raw data, and along the way we will show off some of those tips and tricks and build it from there. So the big things that we're going to talk about today are these subjects. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about good sources of inspiration for your dashboard. I know when I was first starting to learn Tableau, I had to look around a lot and see how other people were thinking about visuals and what looked good. It's very much an art and a science, and so finding good examples for inspiration is important. We're going to talk about organizing your data, so how to group your data into folders and things like that. We'll talk about laying out your dashboard and some of the tricks for using things like layout containers to make it a bit more manageable to work through. We're going to talk about saving custom color palettes. Just an observation I had that people want to be able to do this, and it's often a common ask, so I'll show you how to do that. Next, we'll show visualizations in a tooltip, just another way of adding a nice little supplementary visual into your viz. And then last, a new feature which came 1 or 2 versions ago, dynamic parameters. I'll just talk a bit about what that is, why it was useful in this visual, and show you how to actually build it. So like Erica said, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat and Erica will jump in and bring them up to me. And if they're longer questions or things we might need some more time to think about, we'll spend some time at the end to work through those. But we have some Tableau experts that can work through those. So any questions you might have, we'll do our best to try and answer them. Okay. So before we get started, I'm just going to go over our data set a little bit here in Tableau. So this data set comes just from a public repository that's hosted online. And what we really have here is a breakdown that shows the date, each province, and then within each province we have the number of new cases, active cases, new deaths, and then cumulative cases. So these calculations might be different over time, but basically going back all the way to late February, we have all of those cases. Over on the right, there's a number of calculations that I've had to make a bit later, and you'll see I have a number of sheets here. These are the things that I've just pre-built so that our webinar doesn't go on too long, but we'll show you how to assemble those all together. So let's say you're at this point, you have a nice data set, but you don't really know how you want to lay your dashboard out or what it necessarily should look like or the artistic approach you want to take. So the tip number 1 that we want to show off is good sources of inspiration. And some of you may have noticed this already when you first log into Tableau, but Tableau promotes the Tableau public gallery as a great source of inspiration. So you can open it in Tableau or just search, but what I'll do is actually go into the public gallery and periodically just look at what other people are doing. So within Tableau public, dashboards that look very visually distinct or are very timely to a current event will get promoted and voted upon here, and then the biggest ones will get displayed, and you can look at them and see different ways that people think about visuals. And if you're dealing with your actual corporate type of data. You know, it may not necessarily be exactly what you want, but it can be a really great source of inspiration. So as you can see here, we have some, very cool looking visuals that, for some of them, it might be even hard to believe that they were made in Tableau, and then you might have to think a little bit about how they were actually made. But you can see, some very interesting different designs, that you may not necessarily recognize right off the bat as being made in Tableau. So I'm just going to pick one, for example. Maybe I'll pick this top one. And each one of those is actually interactive and hosted on Tableau. So, you can see we've got a map here. We've got sort of a sheet that shows us, what we're looking at, and then some different bar charts. And you can use this to get an understanding of how people really use the tool. Now, the real tip here is that when you're learning, for most of these visualizations, they are truly public in that you can actually download this dashboard and see exactly how it was built, right? And I've spent a lot of time going through other people's dashboards and seeing, oh, how did you use your dimensions and how did you use your measures and what kind of formatting did you use to make your map look like this? So if you look in the bottom right on some of these visuals, there'll be a download button right there. And this isn't available for all workbooks, but I would say it's available for the vast majority. You have the ability to download from Tableau Public as an actual workbook. So if I click Tableau Workbook, I can select a version. This will get downloaded. And just like any other workbook, I can open it up and see exactly how it was built. Right? So we could unhide all of these sheets and see all the different components that they used. And so, they don't always have to be crazy dashboards like this one, but that's a really great source for inspiration. So tip number one, use Tableau Public Gallery, download some other dashboards and get into them. Okay, so what I have done here is just built a number of simple visuals, right? I didn't want to do anything too crazy like some of the really cool artistic examples on Tableau, but effectively what I've built is some starter visuals that just show off different elements of this data set. So this first sheet shows off new cases over time. In this case, this is Canada-wide, and also highlights the peak date of cases that we had. We also have a line chart showing the shape of the curve for active cases. So, are we trending up? Are we trending down? And then there's a simple 10-day forecast on that as well. That's not a model that's using the R0 and all those kinds of values, but it just shows a basic trend about whether that's going up or down. We have a sheet showing the number of cases. So, the number of active cases, recovered cases, and then cumulative deaths, unfortunately. We have a map of all of Canada, showing us where the cases are mostly distributed. And then just a couple supplementary sheets, a dynamic title, some changes from last week, and then a breakdown. So on the left here, when you look, you can see all of the different fields that we actually use to make these data sets. And some of them in particular, like this changes one, required a lot of calculated fields, right? We had to know to figure out the changes from last week. We had to figure out, well, how many cases were there today? How many cases were there 7 days ago? And then calculate the difference between them. So, we have a bunch of different calculations and fields here. And especially if you're dealing with data sets that are very wide or need large numbers of calculations, your data pane over here can start to get a little bit disorganized, right? So one of the nice features that you can use to organize your data, and this is tip number 2, is the concept of folders. So organize your data into folders. You can see here there's a folders tab that I'm not necessarily using at this point, but what I can do is actually make any number of folders and drag my different dimensions in there. So because I have so many calculated fields, what I'm actually going to do is make a folder just for all my calculated fields and then hide it, because I don't really need them for the other visuals. So to do that, you can just click on a field that you want and then right click on it and go to Folders and then create folder down here. And that's going to give us a window here that allows us to choose what we want the folder to be named. So I'll just call this one calculated fields. And now if we scroll up to the top, if you look right there, we have our folder. It has our field in it, and we can collapse or expand it as we want, right? And so it's a really nice way of organizing your fields. So I'm going to go through and just hold Control and select all of my different fields here. And when I have them all selected, there's quite a few, I'll just drag them in. And now they're good to go. I can collapse my folder. And now you can see I just have the kind of the raw fields that were present in the original data set. So that's quite a lot nicer and a nicer way of organizing them. One little tip here, I'm running the latest version of Tableau, which is 2020.2. You may have been used to in the past seeing the dimensions and measures area. With the concept of folders being promoted a bit more, now Tableau is just showing the difference with this kind of faint line here. So anything above that is a dimension, it's still in blue, and then anything below is a measure. And the same is true within your folders. If I expand these open, you can see we have our date filter, dimensions up here and measures down below. Okay. So let's move on to our next tip, which is actually laying out your dashboard and leveraging layout containers. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new dashboard, and I'll just make it so that it fits my entire screen. Okay, so dashboard design is both an art and a science. As you saw in the Tableau public gallery, you can get really creative with how you lay out the information, but there's also a science in the way that people consume information. The way that people get overwhelmed when presented with too much information, or how their eyes look around. So just a little tip from the beginning is you can search up ways that people consume information. And there's been studies that people have done where they put an iris tracking camera on their face, and then they show them pieces of information. So that could be a poster or a dashboard, and they watch how their eyes tend to move around the display. And what people find is that, at least in countries where you read left to right, people tend to look kind of in the top left corner very first, and then kind of scan their way down, the actual dashboard. So if you're putting the most impactful information, maybe that's your KPI, or it's a really important filter or something like that, you probably want to put it more into the top left of your dashboard, because people are going to look there first, right? Another thing is try to be really sparing with colors and labels. Less is more is kind of the mantra that we use. And this dashboard potentially could show a lot of information, so we'll try to keep it relatively simple. Another tip that I'm going to show you here is the use of layout containers. So you might be tempted at the beginning to just take your different sheets and just start dragging them out wherever you want. But this can result in layouts that sometimes always don't work as you might expect. You might expand your dashboard to a bigger screen, and you've got like sheets kind of moving all over the place. So one of the ways that you can organize your dashboard right off the start is by using the horizontal and vertical layout containers down here. And all that these layout containers are, think of them like boxes that hold different sheets, and they force them to either be stacked horizontally or vertically. So what I kind of want is I have my 4 main visuals: the map, the case statuses, the active cases, the new cases. I'll probably make 2 vertical containers, and then the title at the top will be a horizontal container. And this will allow me to move objects around quite a bit easier. So to start, I'm going to drag out just a vertical container and just place it there. So now it's present. Then I'm going to take my map and just put it into that container. Below that, I'm going to place our case statuses. And now what you can do is actually select the entire layout container and grab them both as a unit. So, before, if I was grabbing a sheet, I would just be grabbing the one map sheet and I could move it around wherever I want. But with the layout container, what I can do is I can actually click on the little drop-down menu here and go select container vertical, right? That's the container they live in. So I'll just zoom in so you can see that all. And what that does is now I've selected both that are in here and I can move them around as a unit. So if you've got lots of sheets, it makes it easier to move them around. So I'm going to add another vertical layout container just to the left here. And I'll fill in the other two. Maybe we want our new cases and our active cases. And I can do the same thing here where I select the actual vertical container. And now watch, if I want to, for example, move maybe I say the map's more important, I want it to be in the top left because it's going to be what people are clicking on. I can go select container vertical, click and drag it, and move the entire thing, right? And swap them both over as one unit. And when I go to, resize my containers, I'm not accidentally, moving this boundary back and forth. I'm only selecting the actual container, and it just makes it easier to lay things out. So let me just rearrange for a minute here. Okay, that's looking better. So in the same way that I just made a vertical layout container, we can do the same thing with a horizontal container. And this is a really nice way of adding things like your titles and labels at the top. So I'll take a horizontal container and just drag it up there. And same thing like I did with the others, I can put different objects into them, and in this case, they'll go in and want to be stacked horizontally. So let me just make sure this fits. So there's our title. I can also add in an image, and you see it wants me to put the image in on the left. It doesn't want me to put it below because it's a horizontal container. So I'll pick my image. Just rearrange. And then I'll also add in a filter in just a minute. So we've built our layout here, and the last thing I'll actually show you is the ability to see how you've used your containers. So if you go into the layout tab, which is on the top left here, at the very bottom, you'll see this item hierarchy. And that contains a hierarchical representation of all of the different things in our dashboard. So there, is our horizontal layout container. There's our vertical ones. And then within them, you can see the sheets that we actually have, right? And I can really quickly find, where's the container, where's the actual sheets, and actually build them from there. So especially if you're kind of confused about which sheets are living where, going in and looking at the hierarchy can be a really great way to do that. Okay, so last thing, I'll move this filter up to the top. Then I'm actually going to delete these legends just because we're going to deal with them in a bit. So the legends by default are also put into a container, and I'll just delete them for now, and we'll end up with kind of the final structure for our dashboard. Okay. Okay, so the next trick I want to show you is one that I thought was very cool the first time I saw it, and that is called the Viz in a Tooltip. So if you look at our dashboard, it's fairly information dense, right? All our visuals are very different, but they're showing off a lot of different things. And putting in another, dashboard or another sheet could make this start to get a little bit cluttered. And sometimes all you want to do is just have, a very little tidbit of information. So if I look at, for example, like BC and I hover over it, you can see in our tooltip here, which is the little box, there really isn't too much information. But maybe one thing I want to do is when I hover over the provinces, I can see kind of a rough bar chart of, roughly how many cases do we have that are active, how many do we have that are recovered, things like that. So what we can actually do is take a very small visual and embed it in this hovering tooltip, where it says province BC. So what I've actually done here is made this little bar chart that breaks it down for us. And it's got a bar of the active, recovered, and then death total. And if I go into map, what I can do is click on Tooltip, and I'm just going to reset this back to the way it was. So there's all the elements we had before. What I can do is actually add another sheet into a tooltip. So if you go insert, you've got all the usual things, all the data that's present, but one of the crucial pieces is I can go into sheets and select a sheet I want to embed. So I think it was called breakdown. And now you can see it's just embedded in there. And now when I hover over my map, that sheet is actually filtered by the province that we're selecting. So you see, as I change from BC, we've got 1,300 or so recovered. I go to Alberta, and it's a little different. And we can have our little bar chart in here, showing those differences between provinces. So another tip, this visual needs to be something that's very tiny, right? I could embed anything in there, but if it's some massive, table or crosstab or graph, it's going to, first of all, probably be a bit clipped or compressed and not look very good. And second of all, it's going to render very slowly. So you want these visuals to be, quite small. And if I was doing this, I would probably even, remove those like current active total and current recovered labels and make them quite a bit shorter. Maybe use an alias or something like that. But now in our map, when we hover over, you can see we get a nice overview of how those all look. Okay. So I'm going to move on now to our next trick, which is creating and saving a custom color palette. So, right now, these are just the defaults that were included within Tableau, but you're not going to want to use the standard kind of blues and oranges that Tableau uses. You're going to want to put in your own custom colors. So, I could go into our new cases, for example, and just choose one of the color palettes here. But if you're anything, like most companies, you typically have your own company style guide, or maybe something like that with the colors you should actually use. So I'm going to show you how you can make your own color palette and put it into Tableau. So the first part of this trick is for those people who don't necessarily have a color palette in mind and don't really know how things should work together. So this is kind of more of the artistic side, but knowing which colors go together and which colors look good together can be a quite difficult thing to get right all of a sudden, right? And Tableau just lets you pick whatever and doesn't necessarily say, these colors, you've chosen this color palette of greens and browns and reds, like maybe they don't look good together. And if we shifted them a little bit, they might look better. So one of the tools that I've really found useful when thinking about my dashboard is some of the color palette generators that are available for free online. And there's one in particular I kind of like called PaletteOn, and there's tons like it, some are free, some are paid. But what it allows you to do is sort of pick a base color that you want your dashboard to be, and then explore different schemes and colors you can use to put them together. So for example, let's say I like this kind of tealy color or whatever that is. I can click these different icons and get some different swatches showing me different colors. So maybe I want a 3-color palette, and I can actually drag this around and it will show me, different colors that will kind of pop together. And you can adjust this yourself based on working with a designer, but just as a start, let's say I like this kind of green color, and I'll just pick it kind of arbitrarily. And you could say, kind of traffic light style, we've got a green and then a kind of a yellowy color and then a red. Within that, if we like it, we can go and see, export our palette, and most of the tools will do this, again, and you can actually see the actual hex values that go into this color. So this one is, 2, 2, and then a bunch of 6s. So back in Tableau, what we can do is we could actually go into our color and then edit colors and select the item that we want. And if you double click it, this is where you can put in the actual color. So if I do 2, 2, and then a bunch of 6s, there's our kind of green color. And I can actually go, add to custom colors, and that color will be saved. And so then in the future, if I want to use these colors, anytime I bring up the color selector here, those are going to be in my custom colors, and I can apply them really easily.
So Tom,
yes.
We just went through a whole branding thing with our marketing department, and we have our own custom colors. So we could do that for our own, like work with people's corporate marketing, corporate messaging to make sure that we've got exactly the right colors, like to appease their corporate communications teams. Correct?
Yeah, for sure. And what you can do usually is if you're, let's say you're building a new dashboard and you're working for a bigger company, I haven't seen one yet that doesn't have their own style guide. So, if you think about all the big brands, they've got very definitive logos and they've got very definitive colors. And typically they'll have a style guide that says, this is how you use the colors. These are the primary colors. These are the accent colors. And these are how you can use them together. And so if you add them to a custom color palette, it's really easier for you to just try them out and select them instead of having to go in every time and typing in the hex code. So
right.
Yeah, just email. Yeah, that's a great question. You can always.
So we could get that. Yeah, get that from marketing or communications, and then get the complementary colors to do in your charts and graphs. Yeah,
for sure. So
cool.
Either, if you're doing it yourself, you can use the online one, and if not, reach out. I'm sure there's someone at your team who has that already. So that's actually, Erica, you bring up a good kind of segue into the next topic. Adding the custom colors in the way that I just showed is one way of doing it. But if you had your own color guide, you can actually save the colors so that it saves across every workbook that you actually make. Because these custom colors that I've made here are bound to the actual, kind of local workbook that I'm building. But if I make a new one, they don't necessarily transfer over. So what people can actually do is edit your actual Tableau preferences file and save the colors in there and make your own custom color palette.
On a larger team, I can share that. Sorry, I know I'm not supposed to ask questions.
No, that's a great question. Yes, you can totally share it and make those available across your whole team so that everyone's kind of starting from the same starting position.
Yeah, because we always want that consistent look and feel, right? It looks really pro and polished and makes all of the presentations and the stories, the data stories that we're telling look slick, right?
Yeah, and I mean, if you have, two dashboards and you go in and one color is slightly off from the other ones and someone notices that, it can kind of be a bit jarring. So having everyone start from the same kind of standardized set of preferences in terms of colors is a really great option. So I'll just briefly show you the way that you actually do that. So within Tableau, when you install Tableau, there's actually going to be a folder in your documents called My Tableau Repository. And when you initially go to save different worksheets or workbooks and things like that, this is where they're going to be saved. So here's some of my examples. But one of the things that you'll notice in this folder is a file called Preferences. And if you just search, Tableau Preferences online, it will show you. But to start, there's really nothing in it. But this is where you can add things like custom colors, and that will persist in your specific Tableau, over time. So I'm just going to show you the one that I'm actually using right now, and then show you how you use it in Tableau. Let me open it up here. Again, don't be frightened with all the code. It's not too bad. But what we have here is, our preferences. We've said I want to make a new color palette. I'm going to call it COVID color palette. And then all that I've done is pasted those values in, right from our actual style guide, and I put them right in there. You can make the red-green diverging. You can make your own custom palettes, as many as you want. And when I go into Tableau, I can actually use those just like any other color palette. So let me show you what that looks like.
And for people like me where that would have been scary, we can just hire you or someone on your team to help out, right?
Yeah, for sure. But if there's someone on your team who you want to kind of take charge on that, they could go in and make the color palette once and then distribute those out to everyone, and then they'll all be starting from the same place. So if I look down at the bottom here, you can see here's our new custom color palette. And if I click on it, there's the kind of colors that we chose here. And just like any other color palette, I can just, click them and distribute them out wherever I want. And so that's just a really nice way of having them ready to go. So I'm just going to walk through here and quickly distribute them to the rest. Put actual estimate. There's another one. I'll just quickly do the map. Same as the other one, you can have the kind of diverging color palettes. There we go. And then lastly, I'll do the case statuses here. So there we go. So now if we look at our dashboard, you know, it's a little bit more consistent and kind of matches our little icon here. So, you know, I could choose whatever color palette I want, and it just makes it a little bit easier there. Okay, so that was a pretty big series of tricks there, and I know we've done a lot, but I hope that this kind of shows you and you just kind of remember where to look and where these all were and what was possible. I've got one more that I wanted to show off. This one's less of a tip or a trick so much as a new feature, but I found it something that's people ask for a lot and is pretty cool. And so the feature is dynamic parameters. And so I'll talk a little about in the past how this kind of worked. So with this dashboard, I wanted to have a way to select like a reference date that we could apply everything to. Part of what I wanted to do is be able to say, you know, this date is, you know, the end of April, but what was the situation in Canada looking like with COVID maybe, you know, 2 weeks ago? And we could jump back for different provinces and see, you know, how the cases looked at that moment in time. Now, I could have done this with a date filter, but one of the problems with things like filters is that if your data set updates, right, and you have new cases being added, the filter doesn't update automatically. And so, you know, you'll be able to select the new values in the filter, but it won't select them automatically by default. And so because this data set is being updated, you know, each and every day, what I really want to be able to do is have my dashboard update continuously and always by default jump to the most recent date, right? So if I was displaying it statically on a website or something, as soon as that data set refreshes, it's going to show me the latest amount of data. So if I go into my parameter here and I edit it, you can see this is just being statically set from these lists of values, right? So I've selected list and here they all are. And I added them from the date and it just, you know, added them all right there. But these are static, you know, they will not update unless I want. So the new part of dynamic parameters, and instead of saying fixed, you can say, you know, I want to populate this list of valid parameter values when the workbook opens from a specific field. So if I select date here, now it'll search through all the unique dates and put them into this list. So that's the first part of dynamic parameters. And, you know, if I go and open this again, they'll all be there. But that only kind of solves half of what I was looking to do. The second part is I want to automatically set the parameter to the most recent value. You can see, you know, the current value is set to this latest date here. But what I want to do is say, you know, the value when the workbook opens, I want it to be the most recent date. And you can see I don't have any way of actually doing that right now. And so the kind of trick here is that we have to make a value that Tableau can use to actually set this parameter to. And what we really want is the maximum of our date, right? And you might see this come up with parameters, especially where you have to choose like the most recent with dates, or you want to choose maybe the biggest one or something like that. So what I'm going to do is actually make a calculated field that is the maximum of the date, and we'll use this as our parameter. So I'll go into my calculated field editor, and maybe I'll call this one most recent date. And to actually use it, you can actually just type max, and then let me just change this to date, right? So whatever the most recent one is. So that's right in there. And now if I go back into my parameter, I should be able to select it, but you'll notice it's still not there. And I'll explain to you why. It's a little bit more technical, but basically this new most recent date field I made is still dependent on the visual, right? If I was showing a sub-province or something, like just the dates for Alberta, they could have different dates. This most recent date value could change, and that would actually break my parameter. So one of the tricks we've seen kind of people run into this problem, and the way that you can actually solve it is by using a level of detail calculation to say, take this maximum date over the entire data set, and it's called like a global parameter. And so if I just go fixed right here, and let me put in my colon. So what this is going to do is say, don't care about what's on the view. I don't care about what I'm filtering by. Just across the entire data set, just give me the max date. I can push apply. And then now, if I go into my parameter and edit it, you can see now I can pick the most recent date. And now whenever I open the workbook, it's going to be set to that most recent date. So let me just actually prove it to you by closing out of this and updating the data set. So I'll exit out of my workbook here. I'm going to go back to our data folder. And I have the current data set that we're reading, and I'm going to go and grab an updated one that I just have in a folder here. I'm going to copy it and then replace the old data set. So if this was, you're thinking like Tableau server or a new data set, this would just be like refreshing your extract, but that's effectively what I'm doing here. So now it's been updated. And let's go back and actually open our dashboard again. Okay, so you can see today is the 20th. I last ran this yesterday. As soon as I open the workbook, it's set to the most recent date. If I go into my parameter, I can all the new values from May that we didn't have before were there, and we can use them in our dashboard just like anything else. So that's a really cool way of keeping your parameters up to date. So it looks like we're kind of coming up on the final bit of the webinar here. So that's it for all of our tips and tricks. We built this kind of cool dashboard, and you could use it to play around with. So I actually have been using this day by day and just kind of logging in and seeing how things are going. And it's quite interesting to watch as the active cases turn into recovery cases. So if we look at like Newfoundland, for example, you can see their active cases spiked, the new cases kind of fell off, and then we had this slow decline to the point where they're basically adding none a day. And what we saw is that this big, scary yellow section of active cases slowly over time converted into recoveries. And we saw a similar kind of trajectory in BC, kind of in Saskatchewan. Quebec's a little bit different. It's just, we had a bit of an anomaly, so it seems like it's still going up. But for the most part, these are the kind of trajectories, right? And that our active cases are going on, are diminishing over time. But one of the things that I really like about this dashboard is using that parameter to jump back in time. It's kind of getting towards the end of May, but I remember, being in mid-March, and this is what our graph looked like, right? Like considerably scarier. In our active cases, there's this huge range, almost no recoveries. It looks really scary from there, but as you move forward into the future, we can see that curves start to flatten out, and then the recoveries start to grow over time, which means that both the citizens of Canada as well as our public health authorities are doing a good job. So just a cool visual I like to jump back into. So with that, I just want to thank you for attending. I hope this was useful, and some of the tips and tricks that you saw today can kind of get you thinking about cool things you could do with your dashboard. So I'm just going to pass things back over to Erica to talk a little bit about some upcoming training courses and boot camps that we have, and then we'll answer any extra questions that might be in the chat. So sure. Thank you very much, and back to the slides.
So actually, your last point kind of leads me into one of my questions, and that is, one of the things that I noticed going into this pandemic was never has data and analysis and data science been more in the headlines, right? Yes. How do you decide what visualization is best, right? Like I'm not the trained professional, that's you, but how did you decide like a stacked line, I think that's what it's called, versus just a regular line chart? How do you decide what viz is going to really make the data pop or sing? Like, I'm sick to death of seeing pie charts. Luckily, I haven't seen lots of those. There's been lots of line charts because of the time component, but how do you decide what's the best way to have the data really tell the story?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and that's kind of the whole art of making good dashboards. You know, this one you could probably make it, you know, be a bit more creative and hide some of the elements here and make it a bit more simple. But it really depends on what the dashboard is going to be used for, right? You can think of an example. For example, maybe if I had a dashboard showing me the state of a plant that I was operating, you know, like at a power plant or something, and I need to be able to find a specific sensor or something really quickly. You might have lots of data and try to highlight ones that are anomalous, you know, and find it really quickly. You might also have a dashboard that's a bit more general, like this one, and it's made more to allow people to explore, right? And so you want to make it a little bit simpler. I mean, in terms of picking the actual visuals, you're going to want to pick the visuals that leverage kind of what you're going to show. So in my case, I knew that this data was by province. So for me, I thought a map is going to be absolutely critical for here. And with the map, I said, you know, if we're thinking about a COVID dashboard, we kind of want to know, you know, where are the cases, are we trending in the right way, and are we adding new ones, things like that. So for the map, I decided to show, you know, where the hot spots of the actual outbreaks. And so that's why those ones are kind of in red. For the case status, you know, you could visualize this as a stacked bar chart or something like that, but really, you know, we're talking about flattening the curve here. And so what I wanted to show is the actual curves, you know, between active and recovered. So you can see, you know, the total area is all the people affected by COVID, and what's the relative proportion between them. And, you know, this chart really allows us to see how they transition over time. The active cases, the thing I really wanted to highlight was this kind of forecast at the end. And so I wanted it to be, you know, immediately you can look at it and see, you know, are active cases bending upwards or are they bending back down, right? And you can really quickly see where that looks like. So I guess to answer your question kind of simply, you want to pick a visual that allows someone who's never seen the dashboard before to understand what it means within seconds, right? If it's very cluttered and noisy and I don't necessarily know what I'm looking at, it'll take me a long time to figure out the information. And I'm spending all my time figuring out how the dashboard works instead of what the dashboard is actually trying to tell me. So
yeah, when I look at this, it's like begging to be touched, right? Like it's begging to be clicked on and investigated. And I want to actually like poke my screen almost, right?
Yeah. I mean, you could probably clean it up even more and make it pop a bit more. You know, it was kind of a first attempt, but you really want to just think about like, what is the essence of the information I want to display here, right? What kind of insights do I want to allow people to find? And then within there, I mean, you can use something like Show Me to play around with different visuals, but you know, for a time series, like there's bar charts and area charts, and just play around with them and see, you know, if I was a new user and I'd never seen this before, would I get this, you know, right away, or would I have to spend some cognitive effort thinking about, you know, what's actually going on here?
Yeah. One of the questions that did come in was the data that you were using. Was it Johns Hopkins?
This data set is similar to the Johns Hopkins, but it's actually from a local Canada source. So we can send that out. It's actually in the slides at the end as an attribution, but it's a publicly hosted one on GitHub that they just update every day, and it's assembled from Canadian public health authorities, so not the Johns Hopkins.
Perfect.
One. But that was a really big source of inspiration for this dashboard for sure. You know, it's a lot of data to keep track of every single country in the world and all their states. So great
for sure.
there.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions?
I think that's it. There's a couple of questions about whether or not you're willing to share your workbook.
We could potentially share this one. I'll have to make sure we're not using it anywhere else, but it is public data, so it probably should
Yeah.
be shared publicly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's it. I think everything else I was able to handle. So yeah, I right away threw Tom off. Not only did I get his name wrong, but I messed up the order of the slides. So yeah, I like to keep him on his toes, and I do a very good job of that. So our last brag slide is our upcoming training. So Tom is one of our certified trainers. We have a few of them, but we've got some upcoming courses. If you're interested, please contact us either at training@newcomp.com or at the phone number there, or you can reach out to myself or Tom. We can give you the information that you need, put you in touch with the right people. If you have any other questions, please feel free to let us know while we're just wrapping up here. We have some pretty fun, go back.
Oh,
we have some
sorry.
pretty fun analytics boot camps. These are actually a lot of fun. So these are meant, they originally started for executives to get kind of their heads wrapped around the new analytics landscape, if you will. But they're more half-day sessions that Tom and his colleagues over at Calgary have put together to really get you started on some of the newer concepts in analytics. Things like data lakes, data science, APIs for connecting systems that don't normally connect instinctively, machine learning, that type of thing. So please check out our website for more information on that. That's newcomp.com. Be patient with us. We are, like I said, we are literally going through a rebranding exercise. So if it doesn't come up right away, it may be because you happen to get it just as Alex and Pooja were loading the content. So try again in a few minutes and you'll get the updated stuff, I'm quite sure. And I think that's it for now. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'll be doing follow-ups. You will get also a survey. Please let us know how we did. If you'd like to see more like this, let us know that as well. We would love to hear from you. That's our metrics. That's how we know how well we did. So it's either the survey or a purchase order. We accept one or either the other or both. And with that, I will wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Tom, thank you so much for this. This has been great. As usual, we appreciate all the time and effort you've put into it.
Thanks everyone for attending, and hope to speak to you again in the future. Bye.
Bye for now, everyone.